Hello and welcome to the Automotive Anecdotes podcast from Automotive Tales, your regular chat about all things on four wheels that your other friends just don't want you to talk about. And of course, you're joined by your regular hosts.
John, at JohnMSM on all social media platforms.
And I'm Martin, at Bob Clayton on Instagram. I still have not worked out Twitter. And of course, we are joined by our regular Series 1 guests as well. We have...
Greg, the Yorkshire engineer on Twitter, but I haven't figured out Instagram yet.
And...
Chris, underscore Chris Norton underscore on Instagram. And I'm not bothered about Twitter.
Perfect underscore. So before we start, we should probably just explain once again, hopefully you all tuned into episode 1, but the format of today, we're going to ask our guests an initial question. That could be first, worst, best, current, cheapest, dumbest, most expensive. It could be any question along that sort of scale with regards to their first car, or first car, a car. We're going to have a discussion about a question point for the day, and then we're going to finish with the new game that is sweeping the nation, Barge Bingo, and it is probably my favourite one this episode. So let's get straight into it and see if we can beat the timings for episode 1, which was definitely what we were planning.
It went well. So yeah, it's half-hour podcast. It was an hour and 10 minutes.
It will hopefully have been edited down. But so... Guys, let's get straight into it. We asked you about your first car, and obviously we had the heartbreaking disappointment that only one of them still exists when we spoke about first cars. So on that same sort of tangent, what were people's worst cars? Anybody want to kick us off with the worst car that you've ever owned?
Go on then, I will start. So the worst car I ever had was one I actually took in part exchange for a car I regretted selling. And it was a Vauxhall Disastra. So it was it's like the bubbly shape, the second or third generation. It was resale silver, really very boring, 1.4 8 valve. It was just hideous. The guy that gave it to me in Partex for the BMW had put these nasty 17-inch wheels on it that were curbed to high hell. Every time you tried to pull away, because it was designed to have little 14-inch steel wheels on it, the clutch just couldn't cope with it, and you could feel it creaking under the strain of the extra diameter of the wheels. It was horrible, and then it started overheating. But ironically, being the worst car, it also turned out to be one of the most fun cars, because I tried to sell it. I fixed a few bits on it. I got rid of the stupid wheels and sold them and put some standard Vauxhall wheels on it. And one person sold it on eBay. They came to look at the car and they just went, I can't even bring myself to drive it, and walked away. I'm like, right. And it literally sold for like £300. And this person was just like, no, I have too much self-respect to drive that heap of crap. Wow. And I was like, what are we going to do with it? So with my fellow friends at the motor club at university, we decided, as we had a freshers fair coming up, what better way to entice the freshers to join our merry group of mentalists than to turn it into the first Vauxhall Disastra convertible. Slightly misguided, because what we should have done is cut across the roof above the windscreen, but instead my friend Andy got a bit cut happy with the angle grinder at the bottom of the A pillar, so we just went across from the top of the bonnet right the way across A, B and C pillar, took the roof off as a wanner, and then that got used for various pranks. We buried it in the grass outside one of the university entrances for a while, so it looked like the car had sunk into the grass. And then the remnants of it, we welded the doors up, welded the bottom half of the boot on, and we drove around campus for a little while until campus security told us we shouldn't be doing that. But we had an awful lot of fun with it.
So the first question that really comes from all of that is, you're not a car dealer, so what made you do part exchange on a BMW? And let's skip over the fact you just sold a BMW for a Vauxhall, but that's fine.
with good reason. So this was my second car. It was a BMW E28 520i. I think we actually mentioned it in the first episode. And I needed rid of it quite swiftly because I had made a small upgrade. And actually, Greg, you were involved in this.
I certainly was.
I forgot about that.
Twice.
We'd done a little road trip to somewhere just inside the M25 in London to pick up a purchase that I'd been bidding on, not really expecting to win on eBay, which was another BMW E28 in Cinnabar red, but this time something a little bit more interesting. It was an M535i, and I hurriedly needed to make space and money to cover the slightly increased insurance at the age of, what would I have been? I'd been about 19, 20, I think, when I got the M535. So I was just desperate. And he said, "Oh well, Partex for this." So I got me some money, and I sold the wheels. It had a cherry bomb exhaust on it as well, so I sold that heap of nastiness. And it was to fund my M535 habit, I will say, because it became a habit. Greg came on more than one road trip picking up rusty BMWs.
So I think we're safe to say that Astra, you went a good way to make sure it wouldn't stay in the world. Presumably, it's no longer with us.
Yes, it got scrapped fairly shortly after that.
Okay, fair enough. Greg, what have you got to bring to the table?
I had an interesting dilemma with this because I think in the last episode I mentioned about my Fiat Brava, but I can't really say that was the worst car, even though it probably was in terms of dynamics and bits and pieces. But that car took me so far and did so many miles, got me out of so many situations, I can't really diss it. So the car I'm bringing to the table is, I had a bit of a wobble while I was in one of my jobs at Bristol, and I ended up with a Kia cee'd.
By a wobble, did you mean that you had you became a bit unhinged and you decided that's a great idea?
I have no idea why I went down that road, really. I think I was probably being the tight Yorkshireman. It was a 1.6 diesel, cheap to tax, cheap to run. And fundamentally, he said that the car was fine. It did the job. It was well kitted for a Kia. It's a 7-year warranty. They
had an apostrophe in its name. I mean, what more do you want?
It had an apostrophe in its name. But for a car that just had no fun factor at all, didn't excite, gave me a bad back.
The seat's that bad?
They were just uncomfortable. They just weren't good. Don't get me wrong. The drivetrain was spot on. It did the job, but it just, there was nothing there. There was no Z factor.
You did make good use of the was it the unlimited mileage warranty?
Yeah, the warranty, and that was the other factor that I actually ended up getting rid of it. I probably did turn it into the worst car. Was the clinching factor was I had one of the very first of the last generation cee'ds off the production line, off the back of the 2012-2013 production run. My garage knew the number plate off before I'd even got to that part of the conversation with them when they rang up. I ironed out so many faults with the Vortex cee'd because they'd never seen one before. They got to about 4 pages on their system for faults, and a lot of it was electrical stuff. And I think that was the other factor about it was the amount of times I spent going in to sort small faults. There weren't big faults that stopped the car. There were small faults. Interestingly, one of them, which I flagged 4 years ago, has just been released as an international recall.
Amazing.
By Kia. So if you're sitting at home without your car because it's had to go in the garage for a recall and it happens to be a Kia cee'd, it's Greg's fault. Sorry.
So it just had lots of little warranty faults. It was the first of a new car. Just because I was doing high mileage, I ironed a lot of them out. Spent a lot of time off. But it was also just a bit of a dull car, really.
So what did you do with it?
I Partexed it for the Mazda 3 that we've got now.
I wonder if they cut the roof off it.
No. Interestingly, from what I understand, it disappeared into Europe somewhere.
Oh, okay.
How bizarre.
What, to be a test subject for other Kia dealers?
Mileage accumulation.
I have no idea.
Fair enough. Well, I have 2 things on that then. So I need you to cast your mind back to driving that Kia. Okay, you're there on the motorway, and I'm just going to hark back to episode 1. You need to pull out because there's a lorry doing 56. What side were the indicators?
Standard side, left hand side.
Interesting. So at that point,
because the cee'd, actual cee'd stands for European development, something European development.
But that meant at some point Hyundai and Kia weren't consistent with each other.
But I don't know, have you checked, because the i30 is the comparable.
Yeah,
That
well,
would
you're
be the
right.
check
That
to
is
make.
true. If anybody here owns a Hyundai i30 from
2013?
yeah, please ring in. Call us on live. No, we can't do that, can we? Tweet us at Automotive Tales. Please tell us. Let us know. It must be said with the Kias, by the way, the warranty. So I had a friend that bought a what would have been sort of the 2010 one of the first editions of the Kia Sportage or Sportage. You know, the one that when it came out, it was a very radical looking car for what it was. You know, it was great. And in
For
fairness,
better or worse, yeah.
yeah, I mean the first editions, in fairness, they had heated seats front and rear. They had a rear view camera in the mirror. It was actually quite a clever car. And he got to it being 6.5 years old. So we're talking, it was a 60 plate. So what are you talking? Sort of at the beginning of 2011, I think this was. And then to the beginning of 2018, he found that both the rear doors were starting to bubble at the top. And Kia, in fairness to them, replaced the doors. At 7 years, just coming up to 7 years old, under that 7-year warranty, they replaced the rear doors. So that it does seem that they, you know,
They do. I can't knock them. Everything I put them in for, they did.
yeah.
Paint, shock absorbers, electrical stuff, all sorts.
So,
I mean, that doesn't rectify the fact it's dull, though, does it?
No.
so did your Mark II seed become a Mark 2.5 seed by the time they'd replaced everything?
Potentially, yeah.
There we go. But,
Yeah.
okay, well,
It was like Trigger's broom. It was. Good reference.
so we've got a car from the 90s, a car from the 2010s. Chris, what can you bring to the table?
My worst car. So this, like many of my cars, is a bit of an amusing story. So my worst car was a 1999 Renault Clio 1.2. I was potentially looking for a kind of first car, something that I could drive once I passed my test. I was still in uni at the time, so I thought I'll get something cheap to run, and I don't mind doing a little bit of work to it before I need to use it. So I'd heard about a friend of mine who wanted to get rid of a Renault Clio, and he said, give me, I'm going to get rid of it, make me an offer I can't refuse. So I went and had a look at it. It was parked up in my friend's yard at the time. Took it out for a bit of a drive, and it was okay actually. And I saw him again the next weekend and said, went down there and I said, so what do you want for it? And he said, make me an offer. And I said, scrap value was quite high at the time, so I said, what about 80 quid?
Oh.
It was about 80 quid. And he was like, oh no, that's too much money.
Oh, right, okay.
What? That's how you want negotiating. No, don't give me that much money.
No, yeah.
Okay.
The car's not that good. So he said, what about 50 quid? And I said, yeah, okay. Knowing full well that was actually less than scrap value.
Yeah.
I bought this Clio for 50 quid. My cousin ended up crashing his Clio, his Mark II Clio as well. And I ended up pinching a lot of the good bits out of it. Mine was an absolute base spec, complete poverty spec. Had nothing good on it.
Right.
And my cousins had quite a lot of options, so I transferred them across, all the radio and the infotainment and all that kind of stuff, because the car was just sat in a field, it had been crashed. So the goal at that point was to just get it on the road and whatever. That didn't happen. It kind of sat around for a bit at my parents' place. And then one day, a friend and I decided that it would now become a field car. So we dragged it around my parents' field doing sort of handbrake turns and all sorts of stuff like that. And we also decided that it would be quite fun to give it a new paint job. So we went to Halfords and we bought various paints and aerosols and masking tape and whatever, and we painted flames all down the side and across the bonnet, and stuff like that, and that was quite amusing.
All the best cars have flames down them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it was a 50 quid car. It was kind of, it's just a bit of fun, really.
At some point, I'm going to do an Automotive Tales video on Andy Bauer and his Mark II Escort that
Oh,
started
yeah.
life with flames, all
Flames
down.
on, yeah.
But they ended up coming off because the insurance company wouldn't insure it with the flames on it and have to repaint it, take them off.
Really?
How bizarre.
That's
It
odd.
sounds like Richard Hammond's Porsche 924 from that classic Top Gear Porsche.
Yeah.
So that car presumably is absolutely reliable and here with us still today.
No, actually. So what actually happened with the Clio is I was going to give it to a friend of mine who lived on a farm and was going to turn it into another field car and strip it out and just have some fun with it. To get it to his house, it didn't have an MOT. I booked it into the nearest MOT garage near him and said, if it fails, you can have it for nothing.
Right.
It actually passed. The guy, much to his credit, went above and beyond the Call of Duty to get it through, including ragging the absolute Jesus out of it to get it through the emissions. At which point it overheated and spilled its coolant everywhere.
Is this how little he wanted to keep this Clio?
Well, I think it made him laugh that it had flames and all sorts up it, and he just wanted to see it on the road.
Incredible.
So, and actually, it turns out this MOT tester I know him quite well now, and he MOTs all of my cars. Undisclosed location. But basically, it passed. So I said to my mate, "Well, I need to do some work to my Volvo over the winter. Do you mind if I just drive it over winter and then you can have it?" I ended up slamming it on some cheap lowering springs, absolutely decked it on the floor, which
As you do.
which made it really prone to snap oversteer or lift off oversteer. It was quite terrible, actually.
Right.
Anyone who knows Clios know that they like to sort of they have reasonably soft front suspension. They like to sort of cock a leg if you can sort of throw them in, and they're quite nice handling cars as standard. Whereas this was slammed on the floor and it was quite stiff. So when you sort of threw it in, if you were to make the mistake of lifting off, it would just flick the back end out quite.
Pirouette.
Yeah, almost attempt to do a pirouette. So I had some interesting experiences with that.
How many times did he put it in a hedge?
None actually, none. But I had a few close calls, shall we say?
A few underwear, please.
Well, a few moments where you don't expect that to happen because you're driving a front wheel drive car, and a few moments of kind of flapping at the steering wheel of correct and go the other way. Anyway, so if I can sum up the fate of that car is it did eventually get given to my friend, and at that point we unlowered it and we turned it into a kind of off-road Clio. So we chopped the wheel arches out, we lifted it back up, and we built like a tube front bumper for it. It ended up, it was a ridiculous car. But in the end, a friend of mine decided that it was a great idea to finish off doing some of the welding with the car running. I think it might have knackered the ECU, and eventually it got scrapped.
Okay, so we're up to two scrapped, one probably still alive somewhere. The cee'd is somewhere in the world, we hope, still running. Well, my worst car is one that I feel really bad putting in as a worst car, because it was just that car that was bad until I say, and then you'll all agree that they're all terrible. I want another go with one of these one day. So I ended up buying...
It was so bad you want to do it again.
Yes. Well, there was a point in my life where I worked for the UK's leading car supermarket. And as part of the deal of working there, you were able to buy part exchanges through their in-house auction. I'm sure anyone in the motor trade has probably had an interesting encounter with auction for cars, which was Motorpoint's auction brand. And I spotted, all the way over in Newport, South Wales, was an MG ZT, the MG's Rover 75 equivalent. The first of the facelift. So it was a 54 plate. So it was.
They changed
square headlights.
Yeah, exactly. The headlights met up again, presumably to save cost, and all the materials inside were pretty shoddy. And unfortunately, it was. And this is where the problem was. It was the 1.8 the 120 brakes.
K-series.
Head gasket.
Head
The
gasket.
mayonnaise machine.
It was the second 1.8 that this car had, and this was in 2011. So it was a 7-year-old car. I bought it for the princely sum of £300. It had a DVD player in the roof that didn't work.
In the roof.
It came out of the roof. It was in the back.
20%
came from the ceiling. Yeah.
Was that factory?
No, it was definitely aftermarket. But it had been wired in properly, and the DVDs you put in the boot, like you would a CD changer at the time, and it had a CD changer in the boot as well. And it had started its life. So it sat on Hampshire plates, but it actually started its life by being out in Germany. It was a forces car. So it spent its life in the first few years in Germany, and it had an impeccable German service record, as you'd expect. And then came back to the UK and had a pretty shoddy life by the looks of it. The refurbished engine essentially failed on day 91 of the 90-day warranty, so the head gasket went on that again. At the same time, it became very apparent that there was a fault in MGs and Rovers of that time, that there was huge...
A fault?
A fault.
Well,
it was quite a killer one, because there was a lot of leakage in the back of the car through the rear tail lights. Went into the spare wheel well. Of course, there wasn't a spare wheel in there, not that anybody checks. And unfortunately, as I found out to my horror, that if you park them facing downhill, that water will get to the front of the car eventually. Which in the end effectively got into the alternator, broke the alternator. Believe it or not, it travelled through the car, into the front of the car, and essentially broke the electrics at the front.
Shorted something out on the way.
It shorted something on the way out. So even if I wanted to replace the engine, which there was no point doing, I couldn't. So the bottom line was it just wasn't feasible to repair. The reason I say that I want another go is because one of the cars I'd love to have a go with in the future is getting hold of one of the V8 Rovers or MGs with the Mustang,
the ZT,
the 280 brake,
rear-wheel drive.
Yeah. And I'd love to have a go, because I think the cars, the Rover had a problem where the initial ones of those, so if you look at sort of 98, 99, when the 75 came out, they were actually really decent quality BMW parts bin cars. And then they stripped, the Phoenix Consortium's plan was to strip them out and replace all the wood with plastic, and replace all the leather with plastic, and replace all the plastic with anything else that's more brittle. And it was, and that was the problem with those cars.
Milk cartons, yeah.
Yeah, and
and it is a shame, and I have to agree with you on that one, because I've seen a couple about, and they're really coveted. You look at the 75, particularly the connoisseur models with that BMW engine in. They're still coveted now. People will go a long distance to buy them in good condition, and they're a lovely. I've been in one briefly, and albeit I found it cramped inside. They're a nice car.
They are. It was a fine. It drove well as well, in fairness. And you know what? Even the 1.8 was still. On the face of it, was quite a fun engine, but it was just not reliable.
The K-series was fundamentally a good engine.
Yeah.
Just some shoddy parts in terms of head gaskets and build quality.
The BMW diesel sourced engines that are in the were in the range all the way through still hold. So if you buy a good condition one, there's still a few thousand. We're still talking thousands for some of these sort of early diesel sort powered Rovers, because they were bulletproof in the same way they were bulletproof in the BMWs of the time. But the one caveat I will add to it, because I appreciate we're already doing well for keeping these podcasts at a good length. I want to give an honourable mention to my family from a army perspective. So my granddad was in the army, but not necessarily in the UK. So they would he'd spent a lot of time out in Singapore and various sort of other parts of the world. But what it meant is when he came back to the UK, he couldn't guarantee that he'd be there for long. So he fell out with Ford because it was a 10-week wait for an Escort at the time. He wanted a brand new. He'd always buy a brand new car, and he couldn't wait for an Escort. So he'd go and buy whatever car was available at the time. So my grandparents' car history consists of a Moscovich, if you've ever heard of a Moscovich.
Amazing.
3 larders, one of which got destroyed by a tree and cut the back off, and the larder dealer still came and picked it up with fuel dripping down the road and went, yeah, we'll fix that. They didn't keep it. And then 3 Nissan Micras in red, white and blue, which were the 3 colours available.
Did he have them at the same time, red, white,
at
and
the same
blue?
time, swapped between him and his 2 daughters, my mum and
Oh, really?
my aunt. Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like
And
the
they-
Italian job.
Yeah, and they used
But with
to-
micros.
and they
That's
used
more
to-
reliable.
Yeah.
they used to rotate them, and my mum kept the white one up until 2002, so they ran quite well. But it's so an honourable mention to them because they've had the most Russian cars that I know about.
Were they the boxy micros or they were the bubble micros?
Yeah, no, the boxy ones. So
Was it
these were
K11?
That's it, K11.
Yeah.
So this was
Yeah.
the ones they had
They're
were
great machines.
two 1987 models and then a 1990 model as well. They replaced
Oh, that'd be a
one of them.
K10 then.
Oh, would it? K10?
Yeah,
There you go.
K10.
I have a funny story then about the K10.
Yeah.
I don't think we've actually got one, so I won't spoil any future. It was the cheapest car I ever bought. I didn't actually pay for. I received a Micra K10 in exchange for a part for another vehicle.
Yeah.
An ashtray for an Audi coupe.
What?
A friend of mine had bought one and it was missing the ashtray, and I got one I was taking apart for bits. And he was like, "Oh, I could really do with the ashtray." And I was like, "Yeah, help yourself." He's like, "What do you want for it?" I don't know, £5, buy me a pint, something like that. He's like, "Do you want a Micra?" "You what?" He's like, "Yeah, I've got a Micra I need rid of. You can have it in exchange for the ashtray." I was like, "Yeah, sold."
It's legal tender, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it's legal tender, an ashtray.
Incredible.
What is the price of that, good sir? Well, that'll be the price of one micro.
One
Yeah,
Micra.
one
Certainly.
Micra to you, sir.
Brilliant.
And I feel really bad about this because at the time it was literally a worthless car, hence the trade.
Yeah.
And we were like, "Oh well, let's see what it takes to kill a car." As you go through this, maybe didn't have enough mechanical sympathy at the time, and we threw so much at that car. And could we kill it? Could we? We tried and tried and tried. Eventually, it went to the scrapyard, a running car, and we did everything to it. Like we took the radiator out, ran it without a radiator. I think somebody even poured grit into the engine, and it still ran. Happy as Larry.
It's funny you say that because the K10 that my mum ran till 2002 only stopped running because harking back to episode 1, she went into the back of a car that had a tow bar attached to it, and obviously a Micra and I can't remember what car it was, a Land Rover or something that had the tow bar on. Obviously was going to win. Still ran, drove it home. The insurance company said no, we're going to scrap this one, and she was given the princely sum of £1,500 for this Micra.
That's pretty
Wow.
Which
good.
she
That's
could
good
not
going.
have got if she'd have. So as far as she was concerned, she'd actually just
Quit it
exchanged
by
it
the crash.
wisely. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. But,
Yeah.
so just to sort of summarise there, of course, the MG also was scrapped, which means that bonus point, Greg, for having, we think, the only running worst car still running in terms of existing, because it might be in the garage for something. So we'll wait and see.
It's still under
Sure,
warranty.
yeah.
being repaired.
Yeah.
So that was great. Thanks, guys. So today's discussion is going to be a little bit different, and it'll be an interesting one because I think it's something that at least 75% of us have experienced in our lifetime. And it's also quite interesting because 100% of us don't have children. But let's talk about estate wars.
Or station wagons or tourings, depending on your flavour.
Yeah, and we mean proper estates. We're not talking about just to get a little bugbear out of the way. You know what grinds my gears? That things like Fiat Doblos and Citroen Berlingos are listed as estates. Anyway, we're talking
The van-
proper estates.
proper estate cars. So first of all, and to kick you all off, and I'm gonna head this to sort of your directions, please. Why is it that estate cars? We've all owned them. Why? What is it
They're
that means
cool.
you end up having them when we don't? I don't know.
There's something about a long roof, isn't there? It's just they just look cooler than a saloon.
I think there's also, for me, there's an element of Yorkshireman in it, and the reason I say that is you
More car for your money, more
Exactly.
steel,
yeah, basically.
more resources.
Brilliant.
And this is something I actually was going to have noted for episode 1 with the grinding gears is, why spend more money on an SUV that's jacked up, that's got a smaller boot space? Yes, you're a couple of foot higher, but you've got less interior space, you've got less boot space, and when you're someone like me who actually owns 2 dogs and has to get them in the boot, wants to get stuff on the roof, bikes on the roof, moves around with the military, the estate just does it all. It's practical and for cheaper.
No.
And being lower to the ground, it handles better than an SUV.
Well, there we go. So that concludes estate.
That's
no,
it.
it's
Actually done.
So actually, going around the table because
I was going to say that I actually I'm definitely in the minority here, but I am not an estate person. I've never owned an estate. I actually purposefully don't buy them because I don't. Well, it's not that I don't like them. I appreciate that they're very useful and I appreciate their function, but I will always go for the saloon version or the coupe version or whatever else is available above the estate version because I don't think that they look that good.
Ooh.
So let the lynching begin.
Okay. I had done a sort of a precursor list of kind of my favourite estates in kind of chronological order, but I'm going to jump down the list to one which is quite evocative, where I think the estate is significantly better looking, just because I think it's balanced very well. So I'm going to pose it to you, Chris.
Yeah, do.
BMW E34 M5
Ooh.
as a touring. Tell me that isn't a fabulous
No, you're
looking
right.
machine.
Great.
The touring is better than the saloon, looks-wise.
But what about the Legacy 159? The sport wagon was always deemed as being the prettier car to the saloon.
I prefer the saloon.
Okay, interesting.
I mean, if we're talking legacies, 4995 will get you a very nice.
Yeah.
They will do, yeah.
Yeah, this topic didn't at all come off the back of looking at estate cars that are for sale and go, ooh, I like this, or I don't like
But
that,
then,
ooh, I like this.
and some companies have actually succeeded in it because you look at the XF Jaguar sell far more sport wagons now in the XF.
Yeah, and that
And
is
they're
a
doing
car
the
that I
actual-
would have in an estate
See,
for.
interestingly, I prefer that as a saloon.
Ah,
Ooh, okay.
But for Jaguar, it worked out massively better.
yeah.
No, it's weird, isn't it? Because it seems to have been a sort of a trend that went away a little bit, and I think it's important to recognise that cars like the Mondeo, the Insignia, they don't sell in huge quantities that they used to anymore, particularly the Mondeo. But you have companies like Volkswagen with the Arteon Fastback and Peugeot with the 508 Fastback, who have sort of redesigned to a coupe
Rebranded.
estate-ish. And I suppose the question is there, because I think Volvo had this problem as well with the V90. They're not as big as they used to be. So what have they lost part of that appeal? I don't know.
I don't know. I think for some companies, I think they're having to trade off against SUVs. You know, you look at Peugeot with the 508. They've had so much success with the 3008, 2008, and obviously the bigger 5008. But the 3008 it's a very popular selling model for Peugeot, and therefore, why would you make a 508 estate when you just can just turn around and say, well, you don't want the coupe/saloon. Look at our SUV, which will do you need. I sort of get that for some companies.
Yeah.
However, other companies have stuck to the formula, and I think if you can get the formula right, I know I own a Mazda 6 estate, and for Mazda, that has worked well. It has sold well for them. Jaguar, the XF Sport Breakers, sold well for them. I think Vauxhall do just because it's practical and it's a bit of a fleet motor, if we're being honest, in the market. And I think for a lot of companies that offers value for money, particularly in terms of the BIK. I know Toyota are doing very well with the Corolla estate at the moment. Again, very good hybrid system, 2 litre and 1.8. It just appeals to the company car market.
So here's the interesting thing, and it sort of goes on from the fact that Volkswagen and Peugeot have sort of gone down the fastback route. You mentioned Vauxhall there. Obviously, I've got an Insignia Grand Sport Tourer. That they've called it Tourer for a long time.
Yeah, I want to mock you for that, but I can't. I actually really like that car.
Well, I didn't think I'd like it, and I genuinely can hand on heart say I bought it because it fit a budget after I'd written off a car, and it ticked all the boxes I needed at that exact time, and I really enjoy driving it. However, Vauxhall no longer produce it. They only do a hatchback Insignia now, but they discontinued it at the facelift this year.
Yeah.
So apparently due to lack of sales. So I'm going to put a vote in there for rarest car sat around the table, but then you have the SJ. So, but it's interesting that that's failed as in that sense, in the same way maybe Mondeos and Insignias as a whole are decreasing. So are they just becoming more of a style over substance?
I think Greg has hit the nail on the head really, because most SUVs, if you think about it, the body shape and the practicality of it is an estate car. It's just upon stilts. So I think
Easy to get into the boot as well. at that
So
height.
I think your estate car buyer is now your SUV.
Oh, massively,
buyer.
particularly with the family. You know, estates would have traditionally been the family, prams in the back, kids in the back, and I think for the ease of getting kids in and out, that's where the SUV market has massively changed and disappeared. But I still can't get around why, when you look at an equivalent SUV to say mine, so the CX-5 is the equivalent to the Mazda 6 It's a smaller boot you're trading off, and for me, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
I guess the estate car world has changed a little bit, because it used to be dominated by the very boxy square Volvos for the practicality. They were known as the antique dealer's car, because you could get a 2-seater Chesterfield, and I have proved this, and you can slide it into the back of a Volvo 850, put the boot down, get in the front, and do 3 figures on the German Autobahn. I think with the aerodynamics of more modern estates, especially those fastbacks, you start to see the rear window sort of slanting in to help with aerodynamics, and actually that reduces the practicality, because all of a sudden the roof is slanting in at the top when you look at it from the rear, and then the rear deck is moving forward in the car, and all of a sudden your aperture isn't actually quite as useful for getting large objects in. Whereas in SUVs, I mean, they've got the aerodynamics of a housing block, so having a flat back doesn't actually matter that much, because it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. And I think the practicality therefore has stayed with that bigger form factor than the estate.
But I think what is slightly disappointing for me, looking at just completely blue sky thinking as well, is that sadly the estate car, if it was still popular, would also help with today's sort of parking and congestion, and we're talking about climate and stuff at the moment. And one of the big things I was thinking about the other day was, your estate cars are generally more efficient than an SUV. They're cheaper to buy than an SUV. Their internal space is more than an SUV, particularly if you buy smart. Even if you go down to the small Skoda Fabio estate, that has got about 550 litres of boot space, which is significantly bigger than pretty much all the SUVs out there.
Rolling out the facts and figures, I'm loving it.
And this is something that you can park easily in multi-stories, nip through traffic, and it's a far more practical car. Will do 60 to the gallon with the right engine, and it's a lot cheaper. But I think people have just got into this SUV trend, and
I have to say, as a bit of a hypocrite, having had an XC90, and I can see why. When I first got the XC90, it was a means to an end, because the 850 had broken down. There's a whole video going to be coming on that. I needed something for towing, and something that would be practical, throw tools in the back, and we ended up using on the fields and various other things. And it was very much a means to an end until I started driving it. I actually really quite liked driving that car. And it was a 5606 plate XC90, so one of the very early ones. But that was a great car, and it was vast inside. Actually, that was on another level, because it was a 7-seater. Even with the 7 seats up, I could still fit all my tools in the boot with the 7 seats up. It was mind-boggling.
You put
the other 2 rows of seats down, and we got the dining table we're sitting at here, this and 6 chairs, and we thought, we should get it in the XC90. We drove all up to Todmorden, slid all this furniture in. We're like, we could probably fit another one in.
You mean the studio table we're sitting at?
The studio, the table for this executive studio.
But how many car parks do you go in now where you can't get an SUV in a car parking slot?
Yeah, the XC90 was a pain in the
neck. Or you see people creeping up multi-storey because they're going, I don't know how high it is, and I can't get around the corners.
It's bad enough with modern cars in car park spaces, because obviously they're not getting any bigger. Even when they build new car parks now, they make the car parking spaces the same size. So a lot of modern cars, it is... creak the door open a little bit. Squeeze out.
Where our studio is based, the road that we're on, the turning into the driveway here is incredibly tight. It's been designed around much smaller vehicles.
Barely fit a Rolls-Royce through it.
Exactly. And the XC90 was a bit of a challenge to get down the road, whereas the new V60 we've got is much, much easier.
I'd be complaining to the council about that. About not being able to fit the roller down.
Bloody first world problem. I cannot get my Rolls-Royce down the road to my house. What are you going to do about it?
I demand that you widen the road.
Nothing, sir. Sod off.
The spirit of ecstasy should not be squeezed.
That's a whole different topic out there.
The thing is a bit, and the more I think about it, the more odd it is in that, estate cars, you mentioned the smaller ones there, Greg, and I want to go back to that, because there was a time when, one of the cars I hated with a passion throughout their generations was 206 and 207 SWs, because I didn't understand but they were small estates, and they've gone Peugeot and all this sort of
so many ways.
Yeah, even Renault. I don't think they even do a Megane. They might still do a Megane estate, but they've got the Kadjar.
It's SUVs fill the gap.
But then Mercedes are now coming out and saying, all right, well, you can have an E-Class, or if you don't want an E-Class, you can have a stylish CLS. But if you don't want a CLS, we'll do an A-Class with a boot. But if you want an A-Class with an estate boot, we might even do you one of them as well. And it seems that has it that small estates and things like that have just gone more, going back to what John said about them being more curved and more stylish, have they just become more premium? Is that?
I don't know, because one of I think Skoda still sell it. I don't know if the Ibiza estate is still around. I think Skoda's filled that market with the Fabia, but there are still the niches for them smaller. You know, the Golf estate is still in production. The Fabia estate is still in production.
You don't see many on the road though.
The Golf estates you are starting to see more and more because people, I think, are filling the gap to the expense of the Passat, because the Passat has got so big and so expensive. People have almost downsized. Because the Golf estate, as it currently is, the same size as an original Passat. And it also fills the gap because the Octavia has got bigger. Yeah. You look at Skoda, the Octavia. How many Octavia estates do you see around? You see a lot of them.
Actually, I think you're on the money there, Martin, because it is that kind of premium market. Where are actually the big estate car sales? It's Mercedes. The BMW 3 Series is one of the most prolific estates.
Yeah.
Certainly the it's E90, E91, E92, I don't remember which one's the estate.
E90, no wait. E91 is the saloon, is it?
92 is the estate.
92
is the estate, yeah.
I'll edit that. So the E92, I totally knew which one that was.
Yeah.
They're one of the most, I think, the most prolific estates out there. In fact, for the previous episode's car challenge, a £5,000 estate, two of the options I had were 3 Series. One was an E46, one was an E92. But I went for the Volvo because it's a Volvo. But they're prolific. They're everywhere. 320D estate is just, or touring, because it's a BMW. Yeah. They're just everywhere.
It's and I think like hotcakes back in the day.
Absolutely.
Didn't they? Yeah.
But that buyer, I think, or that mass market trend has definitely moved towards SUV. They're into BMW X3s, or they're into
Q3s and Q1s.
As somebody in our village is a Q7. Have you ever seen Q7?
It's a big
vast. Because that's where I think Audi reckon. I think most of Audi's market from the A4 estates have gone. The A4 Avant have all moved into sort of Q3s, Q1s.
Which is sad, because the first car on my list of like my favourite estates starts with Audi. I think they really. I know Volvo have done estates for a lot longer, but they did the first properly cooler than Penguin Pierce estate, which was the Audi RS2.
That's a great phrase.
I mean, it's going to be very cold, isn't it? So they took. I mean, what a mad idea that was. They took the Audi Coupe, which in S2 guise was a pretty quick car, 5-cylinder 20-valve turbo, 4-wheel drive, great machine. And then they kind of handed it to Porsche and went, "What can you do with that?" And they came back with something that was so good, because at that time the VAG group included Porsche. They didn't put it to market as a coupe because it was too much of a competitor for the 911. So they would only allow Audi to produce it as an estate. So by some strange sort of management situation, you ended up with this ultimate performance Audi, which only came in estate. And the world kind of realised, well, wow, now that is cool. And it's about the same time then Volvo started using the inline 5, and we got the 850 and the 850 T5 and all the things that come with it.
And of course, you can't not talk about the Volvo 850 without going into
the touring cars. Mm-hmm. So, and I think that's probably, there was a period of time that really put estates on the map as being cool. Was Volvo in 1994? They went to British Touring Car as a laughing stock, turning up with an estate, until all of a sudden they realised it makes a very good roadblock when someone taps the back corner and you hang it sideways through an apex. You might have nudged them and slowed them down, but you can't get past because you've got this great big wall of Volvo in front of you. And I mean, that's where my obsession with Volvo started. We went and saw them racing at Donington Park with my dad. He bought me a little tiny model of it, which I've still got, which I absolutely adore. And then, not long after that, he traded in his 740, I think it was, for a red T5 estate. And at that point, I just thought that was the coolest thing. My dad is driving a race car. I mean, I was only 12, 13 at the time. But to me, that's what it was. It was a race car. Race on Sunday, sell on Monday. It literally that simple.
With the touring cars, am I right in thinking then it wasn't until Honda put the Civic back in as an estate?
Now, I don't know whether somebody on the comments would be able to correct me. I don't know whether they actually banned the estates in BTCC or whether Volvo just did it for 1 year just for a publicity stunt. But it was a long, long time till the estate came back, which I think is bizarre. Because theoretically it should be a bit better in terms of aerodynamics.
Yeah.
I think. It's a long time since I studied aerodynamics.
Just whether that compensates for the extra weight, really.
Well,
Yeah,
that's it.
indeed.
That's it. You know, and I've double checked with so I did check this before with a lot of BTCC Tory drivers. I spoke to Tom Chilton. He said that he's never had to carry anything during a race, so they didn't need the boot space.
Yeah, maybe it was just
No
in
Chesterton
'94 when
safety.
they had to carry that stuffed teddy bear in the back. That was the
Yeah,
reason
there
they
you
went for it.
But I think it's an interesting, and I think it's one that will probably provoke conversation. In fact, what might be quite cool is to sort of see. Well, we'll see. I suppose we'll see from the votes on the from the previous podcast. We'll be able to see sort of what people have thought about estates in that sort of form as well. But it'd be interesting to see what people's comments are away from this table. But so out of interest, then, Greg, you've owned the Mazda 6 estate.
Yes.
Was that your first estate?
No, my first estate was an Octavia VRS.
Ooh, okay. That's
Solid choice.
yeah, that is a solid choice. And what made you sort of go for that rather than the hatchback, equivalent hatchback?
Again, when I was in the market, so that generation of Octavia was a little smaller than your sort of big Passats and stuff, so it was a bit easier to get around where I was living at the time. Again, I was in the military. At the time, I was moving between bases, and I just needed something that I could get all my kit in. I could get the bikes on the roof, I had a roof rack on the roof, I could get all the stuff in the back, and it was just a big practical car, but also would have a bit of fun while I was at it.
It helps as a VRS as well.
And it was a VRS as
It
well,
wasn't
so-
exactly slow.
That's good. But I was going to say that's interesting because my first estate was also a Skoda, but the complete opposite in that mine was it was almost verging on sort of Cadillac-esque where you could push a corner down and it would ripple across the car.
It's not a Superb.
Yeah,
You needed a good seafaring stomach.
yeah, you really did. Yeah, although in fairness, mine just wobbled with the car, so it was. But it's a case of I bought that because I got rid of a van and I gigged, so it was the same thing, kept carrying stuff around. It was just so useful in that regard, and chuck an auto box on it, and the whole wheelbase on the motorway just felt so safe and solid and wafty.
And that's the thing, the amount of people who I've helped out with over the years, sticking stuff in, helping them move house, stick chest of drawers in, pick up boxes, pick up bits of kit, bits of cars, move 5 people in a whole. You go to the airport, you take everybody with you. You can get all your luggage in, all your family in, friends, and just go. It just does the job.
Okay, I've got a question. What's the weirdest thing you've transported in your car?
Ooh, wow.
Because estate cars lend themselves to moving things around.
I think the weirdest thing I've ever moved in my car, well, not weirdest, but most impressive, would probably be about 120 foot's worth of marquee. Both in weight, but that which was incredible, both in terms of weight and actually folding it in, managing to fit.
And probably smell for damp fabric as well.
Yeah, either that or about 1,500 village magazines. Like that's how I measure my car, by the amount of magazines I can fit in it. But the smell of freshly printed paper is not as nice as you'd think. But
I've potentially got 2 answers for this, both surrounding the Volvo 850. So one is a Stockman mannequin that we collected from the V&A Museum, of all places. I had a friend who worked there. She was curating an exhibition at the V&A, and they were throwing out, literally in skips, Stockman mannequins. And we were like, oh, I want one of those. So we drove into central London with the 850, and we drove into the V&A and put a Stockman mannequin in the back.
Smuggled some dead bodies out.
Yeah. Well, that brings me on to the next one.
oh no, no!
I have had a coffin in the Volvo 850.
Oh wow!
Really?
Okay.
So is it legal, John?
Yeah.
I should probably add context. I bought a workshop which used to be a woodworking shop that made coffins,
Wow.
and while trying to figure out why the lights wouldn't work on a damp December evening, I was walking through the upstairs of the building with a torch when I tripped over said coffin. Luckily, I hadn't realised what it was because it was so dark, and I opened it before I realised what it was. Otherwise, it probably would have remained shut because
Yeah.
that's a whole can of worms, literally.
Yeah.
You don't want to open.
Yeah.
And so the following year, when some friends had a Halloween party, I said, "Oh, would you like a coffin for a Halloween party?" And they thought I was joking, was going to bring like a little plastic, model type thing.
Yeah.
And I decided to put the coffin
Incredible.
in the back of the car and turned up with it, and they were slightly freaked out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mainly because it was a child's coffin.
Oh, okay, yeah, no,
Oh,
fair
yeah.
enough.
Creepy.
Yeah, okay, that way, now I know why you suggested this mad topic.
Yes, and the strangest thing about it is we still have it. Because what do you do with an unwanted child's coffin? The funeral directors didn't want it.
You can't really put it for sale, can you? Without
No.
no questions asked.
And somebody said, well, why don't you just take it to the tip? Just think about that for a second.
I'll just chuck this in here.
Leave it out with the recycling.
Excuse me, where's the wood disposal?
Oh, well, just stick it on the bonfire. We have the village bonfire. Again,
Yeah.
think about that image for a second.
Just put it in
So now you're
household
stuck with this coffin.
Yes.
waste. Sorry, Greg, you're saying.
No, I was going to say, I can't say it's anything really, really weird. I think I've probably had some very valuable stuff in my car over the years. I've moved several £1 million worth of aircraft components in the back of my car,
Nice.
various bits and pieces. Usually because we've been transiting between a base, going on an exercise or something, we've had to take something with us, particularly if I've utilised my own vehicle. So I've had an auxiliary power unit for an aircraft in there. That was quite interesting.
Wow.
That's probably the best part of £2 or £3 million worth of engine turbine in there.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah, nothing quite. This is-
I've also on the private land had about 12 people in the car.
Well, they're people movers.
You've hung off the roof of a Volvo V70 on a field before, haven't you?
Yeah, private land, it's a free for all, isn't it? Why
It's
not
free for all.
jump on there? But so we can conclude from that if you from episode 1 we know that Greg doesn't like the A46. So if you see a Mazda on the A46, check what's in the boot because you may have a good field day. eBay sale. But so I think just as a complete tangent, because I'm sure that time is on our side. One of the estates that doesn't get mentioned that much is. Do you remember when Lexus did an estate?
Oh,
An
the
IS
Sport Cross.
An IS Sport
Yeah.
Cross.
I'm not sure I've heard
Why
of that.
did that never catch on?
It's quite a pretty car, actually.
Yeah.
It's
No, absolutely. But it's perhaps people should have a look at that, and if we can revisit that at another time, because I'm very wary that time is not on our side. So I think we can conclude from that that 3 of us were fans of estates, 1 of us wasn't, and we can conclude by saying 3 of us are still fans of estates and 1 of us isn't.
so I'm not converted yet. But
Okay, work to be done then by the time.
We're about 75% right then.
Yeah. So we'll round that up. to
on
the
average.
We'll round that up to the nearest 100. So it leads me to come to before we go, we need to check our Barge Bingo. So before the show, we asked each guest to find the best car with a certain criteria. That criteria this week was £500 bargains. Now, I found this one really easy, and I don't think the others did. So I'm hoping we've all got different things. One of the things that I'm going to put out there really quickly, because me and Greg have already spoken about it off mic. There are lots of Jaguar X types for sale under 500 quid.
Hold on a second.
There's a
Are
reason.
they working with
Yes,
MOT? Really?
working Jaguar X types.
Yes, but they're just Ford Mondeos, transit engine Ford Mondeos in drag. That's what they
They
are.
are, exactly. But who would like to go first? I'm happy to go last because I've got lots of backups in case things get chosen. But go on, John.
Go on, okay. So I'll probably wind back a second as to why we've got this. So I used to have a bit of a thing, especially when I was at university, that I would never pay more than £500 for a car if I could. I always found that cheap bargain basement cars were the best. I bought a Mercedes 190e for 100 quid, which is one of the best cars I ever bought. So I thought, £500 car challenge is great. Turns out I'm a lot older than I realised, and £500 doesn't actually get you an awful lot these days, but there are still some interesting things out there. But I really struggled to find anything interesting. There was an obvious choice. I found a Volvo V70, an early phase
A
one.
Volvo, John.
Which is-
a
I know.
Volvo.
So the V70 that was the facelift 850 essentially, but I couldn't find a T5 in that bracket, so it was a 2.4 petrol, still a 5-cylinder 20 valve twin cam, and that was bang on 500 quid, and the rest of it was. Yeah, I mean, I found a Micra for 450 quid, which is going to be an incredibly indestructible car.
So which one was your submission?
Well, I found one other thing which actually blows the budget, but I think is incredible, and it's actually not a car, but I'm going to show you. I've just shown it to Greg. £800, sort of buying a car. That's what I want.
Perfect.
So I found for sale in Derby, which is a little bit interesting because that's where these are made. Somebody's obviously obviously gone, well, I'm going to
Falling
take
off the back
one
of
with
the lorry,
me.
mate.
Yeah, exactly. Rolls-Royce Spey jet engine with stand, no less. So you can run it up in your workshop and blow the wall off the side of the building. Nice. I don't know. But in looking for £500 cars, I found an £800 Rolls-Royce jet engine. So that's my submission.
Your submission is an over-budget Rolls-Royce jet engine.
Yes.
Thank you, John. Chris, we as is going to become probably a popular routine through here. Your research has led to no research. What have you found?
Yeah, so as always, I've been a naughty boy and I've not done my homework. So I'm doing it in class right now, and I'm not just blindly copying someone. So I can pose a question. Would anybody like a probe?
Oh,
Oh, sweetheart.
There's a wonderful champagne beige Ford probe that I found for £500, and I've always kind of wondered what these are like, and I swear that I've never actually seen one in the metal before. And if I have, I've probably taken absolutely no notice of it.
it was weird of Ford to. I know that it wasn't really introduced for the European market because they had the Cougar and they had the Puma, didn't they? In Europe. Yeah.
It never really took off here, did it?
It always makes me wonder what they're like, but some of the early ones look.
It's very American, I think, isn't it?
Did they get killed off because of Steve Coogan? I'm sure I heard somewhere that...
Specifically him.
Yeah, well, he used one in...
Alan Partridge?
Alan Partridge. Alan Partridge rode a Ford Probe.
I think you might
and it
be
made
right.
it so deeply uncool, as was the idea, that the sales plummeted. I don't know if this is... I can't verify this, but that's what I understand about the Probe.
I think Ford didn't really help themselves, though, with the fact they went, right, we're going to introduce this new edge design at the same time, and they showed off the new Focus and then went, we're going to create a coupe that looks like this, and then the Cougar came out, and the Cougar wasn't a bad looking car.
And the thing is, for the market, when you looked at the time, the Cougar appealed to a market, I hate to say it, this was almost a little bit of a plaything. It was small, it was cheap, it was cheerful. I know a friend who had one, and she loves it. She wishes she still had it to this day. She says the Probe, which is a bit bigger, wasn't as quick, wasn't as sharp.
And if you wanted a handy car, they had the Puma as well, which actually...
Yeah.
Well, the 1.7 Puma, the Ford Racing Puma, wasn't there? That was.
Yeah, so the Puma she had, the Cougar.
It was, but both were just more European.
I mean, the Racing Puma was a wonderful thing with its big wide arches, the Cosworth redeveloped one.
I've always thought they're quite nice looking cars. Very sort of nicely proportioned. There's nothing offensive about their design. They're just quite nice.
Have you ever been in one?
No, I haven't.
I have a friend called Zara who used to have one, and she's a bit of a, what's the word? She's good behind the wheel, shall we say?
Yeah.
And when you hustle those cars, they really do. Yeah. If you know how to hustle it, it's great.
So, I think that's how Kate nearly lost her license, and that's why she got rid of it.
So that's two down. Our two submissions so far are an over-budget jet engine and Ford's best coupe, third best coupe of 1997. So, Greg, do you want to go next? Are you happy to go next?
I'm happy to go next because I've almost stuck to this week's not brief, but theme of estates. So I have picked an estate.
Okay.
And I have gone for a Saab 9.5, but I've gone for a 2.3 turbo.
Oh, you found one.
So this is...
Show me. Oh, very nice.
It's got a ticket at the moment. It's done 160,000 miles, which is not an awful lot.
No, that's fine.
It's had the same owner since 2005. It's got full black leather interior, cruise control, all that jazz, automatic, electric windows, all that jazz.
I call shotgun. We're all looking at Greg going, I quite like this.
And just in true fashion, big, reliable estate. It's got the roof bars on it, leather interior. Should be good for another 100,000 mile. And it's got 100. I think there were 185 brake because I don't think it's the hot. It's the low pressure on this one, but still 185 brake in a big practical Swedish barge. Really,
what's not to love?
Brilliant. Well, it's interesting because
it's 499 by the way.
Which website did you find that on?
That's on Auto Trader.
See, I've obviously not looked properly on Auto Trader because I was looking for something along those lines, and I ended up finding for £494. This isn't my submission, but
£494.
£494, a Saab 9.5 4-door 2-litre turbo. So I'm really glad that you found a 2.3 because that's what I was really sort of looking for. But okay, I found 5, and they all have different merits to them. So I've already said about one of the Saabs. I know what my submission is going to be, and I think, like Greg, I'm going to go for something that actually, if I was spending my money on these 5 cars, this is the one I buy, and it is an estate. Mention the Saab. Honourable mentions for you here. Okay, first of all, you can definitely get for £500. You can get yourself a Ford Mondeo. That goes without saying. And I found a really clean. Annoyingly, the picture won't load. I'm trying to do this live in front of people, but the picture won't load. It's a £500 2004 Ford Mondeo by a dealer. It says new in stock, good runner, and 04 plate. Like that is a clean,
perfectly.
I mean, you really can't knock it. For
It's dull as hell, but
you could daily it.
Yeah.
It's a suitable daily.
So-
it's ROM seal. It's going to do what you know what you need.
And they handled well for the time. They handled well enough.
Yeah.
Exactly.
In fact, that's just reminded me that I've actually discounted a car from my motoring history because it was that unreliable.
Did you
I
have
had a Ford Mondeo, and I completely forgot it.
You actually blanked it out.
So the other
Raised
one,
it.
the other one that I found, which once again pictures aren't working that well, I did find another honourable mention: a 1.6 litre 5-door orange Honda HR-V, which I'd forgotten existed.
cool.
So that looks identical to one that I helped my flatmate at the time in Essex go and look at in Hackney, and we bought it and we drove it back, and I think we probably paid about £600 for it.
So I mean, this one's on for £500,
Yeah.
but it's it's just something a
Not
bit.
bad cars,
£490. It's £10 to stick in fuel.
Yeah.
And it's a Honda, so you know what? It probably
Yeah.
will keep.
Well, she had a couple of dogs, and it was perfect for that kind of thing. It's the room in the back is great.
So,
I was going to say that is a forgotten. I'd completely forgot
Yeah.
about that car.
So
Great.
those are my honourable mentions, and this is where I was going to try and show you my actual choice, but I don't think it's going to load, which is really annoying.
I'll throw an honourable mention in there as well while he's letting it load. Is I actually found a couple of the Hyundai coupes are starting to creep into £500 brackets or there or thereabouts. Bear in mind they're a bit tatty. I discounted one because it was a bit dubious as to whether it was running or not properly.
It has to be running.
Hasn't MOT.
I think it needed a clutch. When I read it, was reading into the depths of it, but you could start to see some ratty coupes started to appear into that bracket now, and they were, a bit of fun at the time, cheap fun.
No, absolutely. So I'm going to go down a very boring route for my actual choice, but I think it's actually very clean. For £300.
Do you need an adenoidal voice on? It's a very clean Rover 200.
Well, it's not a Rover, but it's about as dull and reliable as you can get for £300.
Toyota?
It's a Peugeot.
I saw that one.
A Peugeot 406
406
estate with the 2-litre HDI engine with nav, because it's an end-of-line 2004 model. It's got nav, and it's done just 190,000 miles.
Wait, you said clean?
It's got a big.
It's been
mashed
scuffed
to the back
all the
corner.
way down the side.
Look, it's plastic trim. It's not a problem, but it's a 53 plate, and more importantly, it's clean on the inside. It's got half leather.
Yeah.
It's a Spanish gearbox. It's done 190,000 miles.
But
It's got nav that talks to you because it hasn't got a screen. And I just
Worst
guy
in
that-
car
But you
tech
know what?
ever.
Fair play. Back in the day, though, back when they came out in '94, I think it was 94, 95, around NReg, P-Reg, they came out. They were, compared to Vauxhall Cavalier, early Vectra, Ford Mondeo, they were one of the cars to have. They were a cracking
It was,
piece.
it was that kind of last swan song before Peugeot seemed to lose their
Yeah,
way.
406, 306, the original
Now-
206 and 106, and then they went
all
into
good cars, actually.
The 406 is a good looking car as well, because the 406 Coupe, I've always had a bit of a soft spot for.
Yeah, well, I mean-
Pininfarina one, yeah.
Yeah, well, they're sort of almost separate, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because they're 406 by name, but not by.
But there's
not
kind of like
by
cool
nature.
by association, I think.
Yeah.
Kind of going on.
Shall I
Yeah.
now come completely clean why it's £300
Oh, go on.
for transparency? Because the rule was that it has to have an MOT and be running. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. This car is an excellent runner. Good on fuel. Tick. Needs a bit of maintenance and repair. Fine. Steering rack is leaking fluid. Also has warning lights on, EGR and airbag. But I've driven the car for miles and had no problems. Cam belt done. Nearly new Bridgestone tyres. Also aircon not working, leaking system. Fan not working on heater, loose connection. Apart from this, all okay. Grey, 3 owners. It has an MOT. It runs. It just runs with more light bulbs on the dashboard than it's meant to.
I mean,
No, you see, I probably should come clean about the Saab then, really. 'Cause
here we go.
Before you do that, I also have some coming clean to do.
Because
So.
we're all coming clean
Carry on.
today. But the Saab didn't have any. I don't think I saw any warning lights on it, but he did say that it used a little bit of oil, so obviously the turbo is getting a bit ropey towards the end of its life. It says there's a bit of rust on it here, there, and the aircon didn't work on it. He was honest about that. But yeah, I think £500 you are going to get some foibles.
Yeah. It's also running.
Yeah,
Chris,
I mean-
what's your...
Well, mine has no mention of the MOT, so it's a good runner. I've assumed in the positive, not the negative.
Okay.
Do we know the number plate?
Oh no, now we're actually really going to find out, aren't we? Well, it doesn't seem to have one.
It doesn't have
Not
one.
that it matters, because my entry doesn't actually count.
Oh, that looks like a number
That's
plate
a number
in the
plate.
footwell
Oh,
with some
dear.
illegal font.
Hold on.
Okay.
Yeah, go on.
P23.
Yep.
OEV.
That doesn't even sound legal, does
No,
it?
it doesn't
I
sound
think
like
it
it.
might be P23.
But interesting.
Ford Gold.
Oh, it works.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Gold.
MOT expired in 2018.
Oh. so we have to eliminate your candidate.
Yeah, but I know a place.
But interestingly, I don't know about
Cool.
you. I'm going to throw this out here. It's probably a little bit of an ender, maybe. Is that if you had that £500, as much as these are interesting, there was one car I discounted, but I will probably go and buy if I had to be sensible. And that there was an 03 plate Toyota Avensis, 1.8 VVTi, one owner, 130,000 miles. Everything worked, and a full year's MOT, and it just looked immaculate. You know, you could get in it and drive.
I bet you do another 130,000
Yeah.
miles and still sell it for
Yeah.
500 quid.
Yeah, it's boring as sin, but yeah, does the job, doesn't it?
You know,
Yeah.
So there we go. We'll put them on obviously the social media platforms. You can have either a Saab that's running a little bit hot, a Peugeot that's running hot because the aircon doesn't work, or a jet engine. But you have to put £300 of your own money.
So Chris has been counted out because there's no MOT, but I'm still in, right?
Yeah.
Amazing.
It
Well, it
runs.
has no MOT.
Doesn't need one.
But it
It's
runs.
It's exempt.
Might need an airworthiness certificate,
But
but
have a
otherwise.
look. So it just leaves me to say, obviously, thank you, Chris and Greg, for joining us again. We will be back in a week's time for episode 3. We're going to think up some more subjects to have a discussion about. Make sure that you like and subscribe Automotive Tales and Automotive Anecdotes, available on all your regular podcast streaming services and obviously on YouTube.
Yes, and check out the videos on YouTube as well. So we've got all sorts of stuff going on there, from tall tale videos where we're talking through people's car stories, and also our T5 Rescue, which is our current project car.
Perfect. Brilliant. We will see you again very soon. Have a lovely week. See you next week.
Ta-da!